Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for our March webinar. My name is Marcelina Melvin. I'm the coordinator of professional development, and this is officially my second month delivering webinars for first 3 years, and I'm just really excited to have everyone on board. If everyone could just type yes if they can hear me, we will go ahead and get started. This month, we are talking about equality versus equity in early childhood education. Wonderful. It looks like everyone is hearing me just fine. Natalie is also in attendance on the webinar, and she may be joining in and helping me with today's presentation. So, as we get started, today we're going to be discussing kind of trying to understand the difference between equity and equality. So we're going to be looking at the definition of those words and trying to understand how that relates to early childhood education. We're going to talk about the importance of high quality pre-K, and then try and understand some of the barriers to equity in high quality pre-K. And then the role that implicit bias plays into all of this. Now, typically in most of our webinars, we like to have a video that kind of summarizes or illustrate the conversation or the topic. We're doing something a little differently this month in that we're going to actually start with a video. Natalie and I had discussed this back and forth, and we felt like this video gave a very nice primer to the conversation for today. So let us cue in the video.
Hey, Marcy, I'm going to load it in from my. Oh, Marcy, can you hear me? It's Natalie. I'm going to load it in from my end. I may have some more bandwidth over here, so let me restart it here.
Bear with me. Yes. Okay. Yes.
Bear with us, everyone that's thinking.
when we start to think about children and programs, and particularly infants and toddlers, the biggest issue is how we respond to them in ways that are consistent with the ways in which their families respond to them. Early childhood educators were, I think, the first en masse to embrace the notion of anti-bias education in early childhood, a way of looking at the growth and development potential of children that took into account their cultural being, their cultural selves, with families, of course, and raising issues of bias and how culture gets responded to by the institutions that serve those children.
You know, it's an interesting thing. So many people feel, that's not me. I don't have bias. But implicit
being, their cultural selves, with families, of course, and raising issues of bias and how culture gets responded to by the institutions that serve those children.
You know, it's an interesting thing. So many people feel, that's not me. I don't have bias. But implicit bias means that it's unconscious. We tend to allow that lens to be a part of the way that we view our relationships or the way we interact with
Okay, sorry everybody. I think we're just having some bandwidth issues today. Not sure exactly what's going on, but the video keeps pausing every couple of minutes, and it's kind of hard to follow along. But it is a really good video. Also, we found it public via YouTube, so we can share that link with you, after in our follow-up email, so that you can watch it. It does set up this topic nicely. It is a wonderful illustration, just like Marcy said.
Thank you, Natalie, and I apologize for kind of some of our technical difficulties that it looks like we are having. So let's jump in, and we're going to be talking about the difference between equity and equality. So those terms are very similar, and you may have even have heard the terms used interchangeably. What we want to do today is to really separate and be able to explain the difference very clearly for you. So when we're talking about equality, equality is about ensuring that every individual has an equal opportunity to make the most out of their lives and talents, and believing that no one should have poorer chances because of where they are, where they're from, or to whom they may have been born, regardless of what they believe or regardless of whether they have a disability. Equality recognizes that historically, certain groups and some people with particular characteristics, specifically race, gender, disability, sexuality, may have experienced discrimination. Equity is about fairness and impartiality towards all concerned, based on the principles of even-handed dealings. So it implies that, that giving as much advantage and consideration to all parties, and that should be the same. So that may mean giving one party more advantages to kind of make up for how they may lack as compared to other parties. If we were going to look at them kind of side by side, equity refers to kind of qualities of justice, fairness, or impartiality, so it's about, it doesn't have to be about equal or being about making sure that there is an exact division, but instead making sure that whatever is presented is fair across both parties. So equality is about quantity, where equity is about quality. If we're going to think about equality being synonymous with having like a level playing field, then we're wanting equity to be synonymous with more is given to those who may need it. I love this illustration. So if you think of equality as sameness and then equity as fairness, then it's going to be ensuring that individuals are able to have a leg up if they need to be, because everybody may not start the race at the same place. But we want to make sure that everyone is able to reach that finish line. It looks like we have some individuals that are having difficulty hearing. And I'm going to ask Natalie to help me and troubleshoot that. So why does this matter as we're talking about pre-K, right? So we know that, their socioeconomic status can impact children's development. So research tells us that at 18 months old, children from wealthier homes could identify pictures of simple words such as dog or ball much faster than children from lower income families, right? And so we also know that by those same studies show that by age 2, affluent children had learned 30% more words when intervening than children from lower income homes. So, and these gap disparities continue to widen as children enter school. And so that's where pre-K comes in. So that early education and pre-kindergarten to help prepare some of those lower income students so that they're able to kind of start at least at a similar place to students that may come from more affluent homes. And I mean, there's tons of research out there that talk about individuals or children that are growing up in lower socioeconomic kind of situations. They just aren't as exposed to adults that are talking to them, that are helping with that language development than may occur with higher affluent children. A lot of times in higher affluent families, there is an intentionality behind speaking to and working with their children that may not take place with lower socioeconomic families. When you think about just an individual's capacity to be able to worry about the stress of taking care of their family, getting food on the table, keeping a roof over their heads, it's just sometimes it's that focus on some of those basic needs that they may not then have the capacity to actually do some of the additional engagement work with the child. What we also know is that in some of our pre-K programs. And so these statistics are going to be nationwide statistics. We hope that you join us next week for our expert webinar, where they're going to do a deeper dive and actually talk about the state of Texas as it relates to equity. But, you know, preschool children are expelled at a rate of 3 times that of students in kindergarten through 12th grade. You know, so pre-K students, 3 times as high as kindergarten through 12th grade. But this is statistically, this is what we're seeing. We're also seeing that boys are more than 4 times as likely to be expelled than girls. And then when we take another look at the numbers, we know that African American preschoolers are almost twice as likely to be expelled than preschoolers of European descent. And these are just, like I said before, national statistics. So, you know, some of the thoughts may be, okay, why? Why do we have such high rates of expulsion occurring in preschool? Well, as you know, there have been some looking and investigating. A lot of times it has to do with behavior. The leading reason that these expulsions are taking place, they're all categorized as disciplinary or as behavioral concerns. We also understand that the underlying causes of, let's say, impulsivity or inattention, hyperactive or aggressive behavior in young children may be overlooked or misunderstood because of not understanding kind of culturally where these children may be coming from. When you think about children that may not have had that exposure to that type of structured setting, preschool can be more structured than a child's home life. And so, you know, without understanding some of the cultural backgrounds, there may be lots of factors at work here. In many cases, the children that end up being expelled are the ones that are going to be most likely to benefit from high quality early childhood experiences. We also know that behaviors that are precipitated to the expulsion or suspension, they didn't develop overnight. It wasn't like all of a sudden this happened. You know, this a lot of times when you're talking about behavior in very young children, a lot of this is learned or a failure or a lack of exposure to be able to learn how to self-regulate. I know that last month we talked about kind of when you're talking about early childhood development and how you have children that are plugged into their parents. And so they're learning how to self-regulate from parents. Well, if you have children who have parents who have an inability to regulate their own emotions and or behaviors, then the result is going to be a preschool child that may not know how to regulate. They may not have learned that self-regulation. And so if we're looking at preschool to be that platform where children are learning how to self-regulate, then we're actually asking preschool teachers to do a lot more than just kind of teaching some of those basic reading, alphabet, writing, and socialization skills. Those socialization skills are going to be, in order to be able to develop them, we're going to need to have that foundation of that ability to be able to self-regulate. When we're talking about high quality pre-K service, pre-kindergarten, we know that the benefits of high quality pre-K are, I mean, there's been studies that have been reported about just how important it is because it can help to close that gap. And if it doesn't completely close the gap, it at least prevents the gap from widening further. And the gap that I'm talking about is the gap between kind of, children that may have had exposure to high quality or just they come into school being school ready. And so children attending these high quality preschool programs, we know show an overall improved of cognitive ability. They're later on, they're less likely to be referred for special education services, and they're also less likely to drop out of school or have to repeat a grade later on in life. So just with the foundation of high quality pre-K services, the benefits are far lasting. There's also research by James Heckman who looked at kind of that economic rate of return because it can be expensive to provide kind of high quality pre-K services for children. But we know that there is a rate of return of 7 to 10% per year per dollar invested in quality early childhood pre-K programs. So we're talking about high quality pre-K, and we need to kind of do a little bit deeper dive on what does the research say about those high quality services, right? We know that pre-K, all pre-K programs are not the same, and that there are huge inequities across the spectrum about what children are able to be exposed to and which programs are made available to them. And just kind of across the country, there is a piecemeal of implementation of early childhood education. When we look at what states, we still have some states in our country that don't even offer early pre-K programs across the board. They're not even offering these services to children. And so, that is problematic, and that continues to contribute to a lot of the inequities that we're trying to manage. I mean, the evidence is strong that low-income communities are the ones that will benefit the most from high-quality early education programs. And while they are the programs that will benefit the most, those are also some of the areas where there's a lack of those services made available to the children in that area. There is a lot of confusing hybrid programs that are being offered, but there's a lack of consistency across the board. So how, when we're talking about equity in pre-K, equity can be described as the elimination of privilege, oppression, disparities, and disadvantage that historically has excluded those from belonging to these particular groups. It's like regardless of early childhood teachers' proficiencies in children's home language. And so this was part of the video that was cut off, because in the video they talked about, the importance of meeting children where they are and the importance of children being able to be exposed to high quality service in their native language. And we realize that this is very difficult and challenging to do. And if done properly, it can help to ease some of these inequities. Early childhood programs should be strength-based and based on, what are the strengths for the children that are being served. And then I've alluded to that it's important they, if at all possible, that there is a multilingual support put in place. So this is a Foursquare that you may or may not have seen before now, right? And so Natalie and I, as we were putting this presentation together, thought it would be really awesome to be able to talk through it. Because here is kind of the demonstration of equality, everyone getting the same thing across the board. Then we have a demonstration of equity, where there is a redistribution of supports so that in the end, everyone is able to ultimately be able to see over the fence. So then in this square, we now have liberation, where the barrier itself has been removed. And once that barrier has been removed, then there's no more need for any type of additional support. And so as we have done this, we thought, what were some of the ideas that some of you may have regarding going here into this fourth square? I'm going to ask Natalie to join in and share what some of her ideas that she had for that fourth square. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and share because I'm thinking we may be having some ongoing technical difficulties here. And so one of my ideas was that, we may have some of the kids on the field playing. Some of the kids may be in the bleachers watching the game. One of the kids may even be playing a very different sport. And, with the concept being voice and choice, that, when given an opportunity to actually choose, not everyone is going to want the same thing, but having that dialogue and opportunity, I think, is really important. Kathy has a comment to please remember the advantages of evidence-based home visiting programs to meet both children and parents where they are, to address issues and provide needed support. Thank you so much, Kathy. So when we're talking about evidence-based home visiting programs, we're talking about a lot of programs that are going to take that strength-based approach. And that strength-based approach is going to look at what are the strengths of the family, the parents, the children, to help kind of propel them into a more positive direction. We're going to include a link to this PDF because what I would really like, if you had time, is to take a look and then to please share some of your thoughts with us. So now I want to tell you a little story. I'm going to start with the story as we kind of begin to move into the section where we're talking about implicit bias, because all of these things really build unto one another, because there have historically been inequities within our society. There is a need for high quality pre-K care for a lot of our children that are growing up in socioeconomically disadvantaged situations. Okay. And so we know the importance of high quality pre-K. We understand some of the challenges that we're facing with trying to be able to provide high quality pre-K. In the video, they did a beautiful job of linking all of these together, where they also talked about implicit bias and how implicit bias comes to mind or comes into play when we're talking about high quality pre-K centers and high quality pre-K services. So let me first start by telling you a story. So late one night, a man was searching for something in a parking lot. He was on his hands and knees. He was crawling around a bright circle of light created by a street light overhead. A woman was walking by and she stopped and she was kind of taking in the scene and looking at this man and what he was doing. And so she asked him, "What are you looking for? Can I help you?" And so the guy says, "My car keys. Any chance you've seen them?" And so the lady asks, "You dropped them right around here?" And the guy says, "Oh no, I dropped them way over there." And he gestured vaguely to some spot far away on another side of the parking lot. And so the lady asks, "Then why are you looking here?" The man paused to consider the question. And then he says, "Because this is where the light is." So there is research from the Yale Child Study Center, which suggests that many preschool teachers look for disruptive behavior in pretty much the same way, in just one place, waiting for it to appear. So the problem with this strategy is not only is it ineffective, but you're going to find what you're looking for if you continue to look in one specific place. And then this is kind of the essence of implicit bias, is that, basically based on the statistics that we had just talked about earlier, we have some teachers that are spending way too much time watching African American boys and expecting the worst. So the researcher at Yale who did this was Dr. Gilliam. And here are a couple of his, quotes on implicit bias. Is that one, we all have them. It's a very natural process by which we take information and we judge people on the basis of generalizations regarding that information. And we all do it. We all have implicit biases. Next, it's the tendency to base classroom observations on the gender and race of a child may explain in part why we see certain children that are more frequently identified as misbehaving, and hence there then becomes a racial disparity in discipline. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the research that Dr. Gilliam did to help us understand it a little bit more. So in the experiment, Dr. Gilliam was at an annual conference for pre-K teachers. So while here at this large conference, he and his team recruited about 135 educators and asked them to watch a few short videos, right? So what he said was during the videos, he was asking them to, kind of be on the lookout for misbehavior, right? So they're watching the videos and they're looking to point out children behaving badly, okay? Now, in each of the videos, they contained 4 children, an African-American boy, an African-American girl, a Caucasian boy, and a Caucasian girl. Now, this was the deception. Nobody was behaving badly in the videos. There was no challenging behaviors. However, on the onset, the teachers were told that they were there to be on the lookout for challenging behaviors. So during this incident, or during this experiment, the teachers, using like eye scan technology, the teachers' eye watch, so the teachers watched, and an eye scan technology measured the trajectory of their gaze. So basically, they were able to figure out as they were scanning the video, where were the teacher's eyes landing. And Gillian wanted to know, when the teachers were expecting bad behavior, basically, who did they watch? And what they found was exactly what you would expect based upon the rates across this country of children that are being expelled from preschool. Teachers looked more at the Black children than the white children, and specifically the African American boy. And this was just across the board, right? And this highlights that point about implicit bias. And so one of the links that I have here is because we all have implicit biases. And, in the video, if we would have had an opportunity to kind of listen to it in its entirety, one of the speakers talked about one of the first steps to addressing implicit bias is to first recognize. You have to first acknowledge and recognize where your implicit biases are. There are a couple of different options out there. One that is very common is one done by Harvard. And they have like a series of implicit bias tests where you can test your preference of male versus female, of light skin versus dark skinned, of white versus black. There are a ton of different options. And so that's one of the options that we wanted to provide you guys with, was an opportunity to be able to explore some of your own implicit bias, owning the fact that we all have them. And, one of the very first things that's important is that we recognize and acknowledge our own biases. And this can be very uncomfortable to do. Has anyone listening, are you familiar with this Harvard test? Have you taken the test? Any thoughts? I think Natalie is having issues with her speaker. When she and I were talking about this, one of the things that she commented on, how this is not her favorite kind of tool to use. And one of the reasons is she kind of feels like it sets you up kind of in a negative way. What's considered good, what's considered bad. Just on the onset, she felt like there may be some priming taking place. And so I think, it's definitely at least a place to start. And so let's see, we have several people that are familiar and state that it was very interesting for self-reflection. Some people that haven't heard of it, I definitely want to encourage people to go and to try this out. Because especially when we're thinking about, just this topic in general, and again, I really hate that the video didn't play through in its entirety because it did such a beautiful job of wrapping all of these things in together. Because it talked about how, we're talking about infant mental health, we're talking about the adult's capacity to be able to manage and nurture the children in their care. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about infant mental health. And so we can all begin to understand how our own implicit bias may come into play when we are addressing the care of children. And for, individuals that are doing home care or working with families, it can certainly come into play when talking about these family systems as a whole. I continue to summarize the video and want to actually attempt to try and play the video again. But I promise that if it stops, I'm going to stop and then we're going to come back to the webinar. But I do want to try once more.
When we start to think about children and programs, and particularly infants and toddlers, the biggest issue is how we respond to them in ways that are consistent with the ways in which their families respond to them. Early childhood educators were, I think, the first en masse to embrace the notion of anti-bias education in early childhood, a way of looking at the growth and development potential of children that took into account their cultural being, their cultural selves, with families, of course, and raising issues of bias and how culture gets responded to by the institutions that serve those children.
You know, it's an interesting thing. So many people feel, that's not me. I don't have bias. But implicit bias means that it's unconscious. We tend to allow that lens to be a part of the way that we view our relationships or the way we interact with children and families.
Too often, teachers see children as lacking when they come from a variety of cultural groups. So, for example, if families don't speak English, we see that as a limitation for children. When in fact we know from a developmental standpoint that development occurs in all languages, and indeed, if children come to school from a family that speaks Spanish, if we were able to provide a continuous experience in Spanish, we would not have any disruption in the cultural continuity for that child. But in our programs where that disruption occurs, we often blame the kids and the families for not being able to keep up or not becoming fluent as quickly as we would like in English, without looking at the other side of the coin, which is our responses to what they bring to the setting. It makes more sense to me to think about how we can provide environments that are more continuous in terms of the cultural continuity for these children, so that there is no disruption in expectations, there is no disruption in their developmental progression.
Infant and early childhood mental health is really about supporting and building the adult's capacity to support children's health and wellness. It's not about fixing kids, but it's about supporting adults to really be able to help facilitate healthy growth and development for social emotional growth for children.
I would argue that our expectations for children are often a function of society's expectations. So we know, for example, that Native American children are behind in their school achievement. And
Okay, yay, it works. I hope that you enjoyed that video. What I will do is make sure that we send the link to the video out in the email following up with this webinar as well, in order that you can reference it again. What were some of your thoughts? One of the reasons I really liked the video and wanted to show it was just the vulnerability of one of the speakers. As you know, I love how she frankly said, you know, we have to start with awareness. Awareness is going to be that first step. And I think it was one of you had typed something about self-reflection. I think that was you, Kathy, you know, just kind of like the importance of self-reflection. And you're absolutely right. In this work, self-reflection is extremely important. And that's part of that awareness. In order for us to, you know, do something different, we have to first acknowledge that there may need to be a change on our part in some type of way. And so, you know, that can be very uncomfortable, but it's really important to start with ourselves. Those of you that stated you've actually gone and taken the implicit bias test, were you surprised at the results? Did you learn something that was uncomfortable? You know, I'm just curious as to what some of those results may have been. I know that when I took the test, one of the things that made me really, you know, according to the test, I had a slight preference for individuals that were fair complexion over individuals that were darker complected. And so, you know, that can be uncomfortable. Even as I kind of mention this out into the Ethernet. But, you know, really, I think it's important, and that we have to have that vulnerability, and that is going to be what is going to make us better providers of the work that we do. Heather, you're saying it definitely sets the tone for the ACE awareness, reframing what's wrong with you to what happened to you. Absolutely. And being more mindful of our own reactivity. Absolutely. That there is a shift that we are trying to do. It is definitely a paradigm shift. Instead of what's wrong with you, what happened, because one implies you are the problem, the other implies the problem is the problem, and let me join with you so that we can try and solve that problem. And Sarah, yes, you were saying it works hand in hand with ACE awareness questionnaire. Beautiful. And for those of you that aren't familiar, I believe there was a webinar done last year on ACEs, which is the adverse child experiences. And so it's about 10 questions or yes or no questions. And, you know, based upon this questionnaire, it kind of sets the stage for what we know may potentially happen later in life. So individuals with, and you guys may need to help me, but I believe individuals with 4 or more ACEs were at higher risk of certain types of mental health issues, certain types of physical ailments as well, really tying in those two pieces of mental and physical body, right? Your mind and body are all one and connected. Heather, you're saying that Oprah talked about ACEs with Bruce Perry on 60 Minutes a couple of weekends ago. I love Bruce Perry's work on trauma, and so I bet that would definitely be great to look up. And then, yes, Sarah saw it and says that it was amazing as well. That is awesome. Any other thoughts or feedback? I'm really glad that we were able to get the video to play, because I felt like that did a beautiful job of linking together kind of equity as well as our implicit bias and how they relate to the work that we do in early childhood care and early childhood education. Oh, Dana's saying that Sesame Street is introducing an ACE campaign. I am not familiar with that, Dana, but I will definitely be looking that up. And there, as a couple of you are definitely typing in additional things, I want to, open this up if there are any other questions or comments. And while people are typing, I want to make sure that you all are aware of our expert session. We have our expert session scheduled for next week on the 28th at noon, where we're going to have 2 amazing presenters. They're going to co-present for us because, just the work that they're doing. We have Morgan Craven, who works on the School to Prison Pipeline Project. And then we have Diane Ewing, who is a early childhood mental wellness in Texas expert. And they are going to talk about what does kind of the statistics look like for us here in Texas. And so I'm really excited that they both agreed to present. We've had a couple of other, Monica, you're saying that you love the comment about how boys' normal behavior is often viewed as misbehavior. I think you're absolutely right. And that school settings often seem more conducive to girls. Bring back play. No, absolutely. Boys and girls are different. They're very different in how they engage with the world. And you're absolutely right that, sometimes that whole view of roughhousing, it is actually typical boy behavior that may not fit into, kind of what is ideal for an educational setting, kind of the whole sit down and controlling of one's body. What we also know about brain development that I want to point out is during that very second stage of brain development occurs somewhere between the age of 4 to 6. So we have some synaptic pruning that's happening, and that's where children are becoming, they're having more and more, they're gaining more and more self-control. And we know that happens quicker for girls than it does for boys. So all of these things that, may be viewed as misbehavior, it is very typical age-appropriate development that may not be conducive for us as adults as we're trying to get done whatever is our agenda. And I think that sometimes it's helpful to just kind of stop and take a couple of steps back. Let's see, we have a couple of comments. Kathy talked about Prevent Child Abuse America did a follow-up with Bruce Perry, and they're hoping to do more webinars in the future. reframing. Oh, okay. Sorry. We have lots of things happening here. Sarah says it also reframes the thought that some of the behaviors is defiance when it's actually being exhibited for a purpose to meet a need. Absolutely. That's one of my favorite quotes, Sarah, is to say, instead of viewing behavior as something that we need to deal with, we need to view behavior as a statement of need, right? Thinking about children and their ability to effectively communicate their needs to us, the way they do that is through actions. So no, you're absolutely right. Thank you so much for adding that in there. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Adrian, because bias is unconscious, what kinds of questions do you recommend one ask oneself to dive deeper into this space of unconscious? Adrian, that was one of the reasons why we threw up the link to Harvard's implicit bias test. There are several online types of tests available that would kind of cue you in to what some of those kind of responses may be. And so that's why I would encourage everyone to visit the website, to do some of the tests, and then to kind of reflect on what the results were. I think that's one of the probably safest and easiest ways is just to go online and go through one of the tests. What we'll do is make sure that in our follow-up email, we'll have a link to the video. I'll include the a PDF of that four-corner kind of beyond, equality, equity, liberation, and then what's the next step. Just for any of you that may be, interested in, I would love to know your feedback, as well as the link to the Harvard study. So I'll make sure that I include those three things in the follow-up email to you. So it looks like we are at 2:57. And if there are no